Hello and welcome everybody to New Hampshire Peace Action's Peace and Justice Conversation series online. I'm Will Hopkins. I'm the director of New Hampshire Peace Action. If you're new to our organization, we educate, mobilize, and organize to build a more peaceful and just future for all. We envisage a future where international relations are based on cooperation instead of competition and conflict, and where mutual benefit and shared security lead to a more peaceful and just global community. The corona pandemic spurred us to start this bi-weekly conversation series almost 3 years ago now as a way to continue our public education work. We found it so effective and such a good way to reach out to folks that we've decided to continue it on indefinitely. This bi-weekly online conversation series is intended to help us engage and sort out how to make the changes that we've all been yearning for and working for. In the spirit of understanding and respect, we'd like to open by acknowledging that we're doing our work here in New Hampshire on the traditional ancestral homeland of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki peoples past and present. We want to honor with gratitude the land and waterways that they have been stewarding throughout the generations. So tonight, we are marking Martin Luther King Jr. Day by inviting Grace Kindeke to speak with us about the triplets of evil and King's legacy. Grace is an artist, an activist, and a dancer. She's a community organizer. She studied Africana studies and sociology at UMass Boston. She was born in Democratic Republic of Congo and raised here in New Hampshire. She's an avid reader, thinker, and considers herself a Black feminist Afrofuturist dedicated to a more just and liberated world. Today, we're going to get to congratulate Grace, who this year received the Martin Luther King Jr. Award. Grace has been with AFSC, who New Hampshire Peace Action was born out of and works closely with. We share office space. When my mentor, Arnie Alpert, retired 3 years ago, Grace came in, and we are grateful that Grace, rather than trying to fill Arnie's shoes, brought her own shoes and has been organizing in those shoes and moving our culture in those shoes and teaching us all in those shoes. And Grace and her shoes are here tonight to talk to us a little bit. So thank you, Grace. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Will. Oh, that's so relaxing. I've been feeling a little bit nervous, not sure exactly, how things are going to go, but I'm glad to be here with all of you, actually in my slippers. Those are the shoes I bring in this space together with all of you. So I'm really grateful to be able to be in conversation with you. Will and the New Hampshire Peace Action team kind of gave me the go ahead to kind of make this space our own for this evening. It's pretty late. It's been a long day for myself, and I'm sure for many of you in all that you were doing and the activities that you were doing, and for reflecting on this really important day, celebrating Martin Luther King's life, his vision, and the blueprint that he set forward for all of us before he was assassinated and taken from this world. So I have been sitting up very much with that reflection. And so my hope for tonight is that we take this space to be in conversation with each other. I will share my reflections on Dr. King's teachings, what I have been taking in, how I've been connecting it to the work that we are doing, how my own life experiences and the experiences of the communities that I come from informs the work that we are doing, and how to ground it in both the vision of a better world, but also in the pragmatic and practical steps that need to be taken in order for us to get to that better world, and how I think in many ways that vision has evolved so much as Dr. King predicted. And so I'd like to share a little bit about myself, just as an introduction for y'all who don't know me, and then to open up to talking about how the three evils of racism and poverty and war are kind of being realized in New Hampshire. And then opening it up in, different blocks, try not to talk too much for too long before opening it up to hear your voices, to hear your perspective. I don't consider myself to be an expert in this work. I am privileged to be able to do this work, to get paid to do this work. But even more so, I'm very privileged and honored to be able to do this work with such a variety, a diversity of people from so many different backgrounds, so many different visions and ideas and spaces and towns and cities in New Hampshire. And so I really want to be able to be in conversation with all of you because it is together that we can do this. And each of our perspectives, our voices, each of our parts contribute to the whole to get us to the mountaintop as Dr. King envisioned. So yes, so I'll start with myself. Like Will so eloquently shared, I am from the Democratic Republic of Congo. I am an immigrant. I came to the United States when I was just a wee baby toddler. And I lived in New Hampshire, I've grown up in New Hampshire. And for much of my life, I thought I was very much like other people, although life was difficult in ways that I didn't always fully understand until I had the language to understand that life is very, very hard and very different when you are the child of a single parent, and in particular, a single Black mother living in a predominantly white state and having to deal with being both undocumented yourself and having your child be undocumented. And so I learned very quickly what that over time, when I found out what my status was and what it meant to be an undocumented immigrant living in the United States and the barriers that that presented to being able to do certain things. And so in reflecting on Martin Luther King holiday, the fact that Martin Luther King holiday wasn't official in New Hampshire until 2000. And I was in the 7th grade in 2000 going to the Dairyfield School. And so I learned about Dr. King at home. I did not learn about him in school. They did not teach really. We did not commemorate his life or his teachings. And what we did talk about really focused on his dream of a better world, a dream where little Black boys and little Black girls and little white boys and little white girls could play together. But what I didn't learn was about his bigger dream, the dream that he learned that became more of a, more realistic as the realities of poverty and racism and the military and industrial complex really began to show that what we are fighting for, more than just the soul of our country, is for our own souls as a community of people who are able to meet the basic needs of every living person who comes into this world, who does not use exploitation and abuse in order to make things, in order to make profit that only benefits some and not enough. And so that's a little bit of who I am. I'm definitely curious to hear who else is in the room with us tonight. So if you could please, introduce yourselves or share in the chat. One of the things I loved about listening to Dr. King's sermons, and if you haven't had a chance to listen to him, I'm sure many of you have, but listening to, especially when he is in mixed audiences or he is preaching to his congregation and hearing from people in the background, hearing people those encouraging voices, people calling out in response to his words is really important. And it showed that he was not alone in his work. He was part of a community of people, both who were uplifted and regenerated by the things that he was saying, but whom he also was nurtured by as well. And so please put your names in the chat. Greetings upon all of you. Hello, Flo. Hello, Evelyn. So please introduce yourselves in the chat so we can get this conversation going. So I'll take a pause for a moment. I said a lot there. Will, you look like you have something to say? Do you have something you want to add in?
Jump in to stay for questions and answers and moving the discussion forward. Folks are welcome to use the hand raise function in Zoom, or you could also put an asterisk in the chat and I'll call on you, or you can type your questions in the chat and I'll read them aloud so that Grace can respond to them.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Will. So in the work that I do as part of AFSC in the advocacy and community organizing, that work really focuses on fighting for the rights and well-being of immigrants, of detained and incarcerated people, and fighting for equitable and dignified access to adequate housing, fair wages, healthcare, equitable treatment and support for education, in particular among low income and BIPOC communities. And so why that matters is because one of the things that I am very, very wowed by, both in the history of the New Hampshire program, but also AFSC as an organization and the people that AFSC has worked with throughout the 100 years of its history, is how broad the work is and how broad the work needs to be. So Dr. King, in speaking of the racism, the triplets of evil and how they interact with one another, so much of it is apparent, I believe, in what we see and what we're seeing now in New Hampshire. So much of what he predicted, and so much of what we know when we're talking about the importance of protecting civil rights, and now living in a time where it is the importance of protecting not only our civil rights, but our human rights, and how we are seeing in the systemic defunding of our school system, the housing crisis that we are experiencing, high rents and low vacancy rates, as well as how much of our money continues, lines of our budget, resources and public money continues to go into the war machine, whether that's the militarization of our border, which has been an excuse and a reason to continue to closing our border, suspending asylum, which is the case now, as well as seeing how over and over as we ask, as advocates, as we ask for better housing options, better school systems, better education, and an opportunity for people to enter into the country and have the opportunities to adjust their status, to apply for asylum, to apply for protections, and to create protections and a pathway to citizenship for the millions of undocumented workers who, undocumented people, many of whom work and contribute to the society, but have benefit from none of its protections. More and more we see how so much more of our public funds goes into the demilitarization, as well as the detention and deportation, if we're talking about immigration, as well as more in law enforcement, more punishment systems, larger jails, larger prisons, and yet never seems to be enough for those critical social services that we need, the base services that we all should have access to, including housing, food, and a proper education, as well as healthcare. And so we're seeing that, right? We're seeing that in New Hampshire. We're seeing that in the school voucher programs that have been, the education freedom accounts, which are the school voucher programs that are now into place, that are millions of dollars over budget, far worse than what we've seen, what was initially predicted. And we're seeing a movement and a backlash against further calls for justice, for anti-racism, for doing the hard work of being able to recognize the ongoing disparities, the outcomes of those systemic defunding and those systemic disinvestment in those systems. And so what has been so clearly apparent is that which Dr. King saw, 50 years ago, is exactly what we are continuing to experience now. And indeed, it's become worse, as we've seen, as income disparities have worsened, and more issues are happening in our communities. And so I'll take a pause there, because I've been speaking for about 6 minutes straight, and just take a moment to reflect on that a little bit and invite your reflections on that as well. I think I saw one person come off mute, but I'll let Will see if anybody has their hand up or would like to speak and reflect on that.
I do see a lot of greetings from the chat, and I don't think there were any questions, but a lot of just folks shouting out who they are and being grateful for your words. So did anybody, Evelyn's got her hand up. So Evelyn, did you want to jump in and say something? You are muted, Evelyn.
Thank you so much for all your grace, for coming and being in New Hampshire. Your presence, I'm sure, is really important. It just seems so strange to me. All these concerns, education, health, are everybody's concerns. It doesn't matter any strata when you think about it. It's important to everybody, education, housing. So I think what I want to see is this country come together on these issues and that it not be politicized, that it doesn't become a political issue. It's a human issue for a better life for all. So how do we address that without, and I wrote that in the question, that we can really make a substantial progress so that everybody, the workers, for example, the auto workers, the steel workers who have lost their jobs, that everybody's voices, I don't want to say everybody's, but I mean all the different groups. And I think we're all united by not being part of the 0.1%. So yeah, I'm curious to hear your reflections on that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Evelyn. So if I can kind of reflect back, what I hear your question is like kind of what would it take, to do these basic needs, these basic necessities, they matter to all of us, right? We're all flesh and blood.
Right.
We need the same thing. So what would it take to bring us sort of all together around that? And I think that is a really good question. And I think that, especially in New Hampshire as well, like how small New Hampshire is, how in some ways, very insulated. I think it's, Dr. King talked a lot about the need for us to come together and to see one another's humanity, our brotherhood and our sisterhood. And I think that's still in many ways is still the case in terms of seeing our humanity. But I think beyond that is recognizing our responsibility towards one another. At least that's how I have seen it, because I think it's important for us to take a look at our culture. I find it to be a privilege I consider myself to be of three cultures. I am African, Congolese. I am American, ethnically American, growing up in white America. And so I have learned a lot of the cultural rules of white America. And I'm also Black American, and I'm Black. I'm from the diaspora. And so having to navigate within those spaces and recognizing that as an American culture, the very values that we uplift, individualism, sort of ruggedly hustle culture, getting through. I mean, a lot of it is the values of white supremacy that we have taken on as sort of our cultural norms. And so until we are able both to respond, understand that that is what's happening, those are sort of the hidden rules, the norms and behaviors that we take for granted as part of our cultural fabric as a nation. And then we start to intentionally subvert that, both by going back to indigenous practices. I mean, there was a time before white supremacy, right? And not only the indigenous knowledge, but also, and indigenous knowledge, not only of indigenous America, but indigenous Africa, indigenous South America, indigenous Latin America, indigenous Europe, before, certain aspects in systems cropped up, and colonialism and slavery and all those things. So some of it I think is both a need, and I want to hear what other people have to say, but I reflect on that. I have no perfect answers, but I know that it is both a reflection in how we are in relationship to one another collectively, but also how we are in relationship to one another interpersonally, and thinking about the health of our relationships. Are we in relationships with people in ways where we are nurturing, or are we perpetuating toxic or traumatic behaviors and ways of interacting? Do we support one another, or do we tear each other down? And how is that reflected both personally as well as collectively? So I'll toss that back to Will. I know we have a couple more hands up, and if folks have other reflections in addition to their questions or their own reflections, please include that as well.
Yeah, and I'm going to encourage folks who want to respond to that prompt to do so in the chat, because it's going to be hard to keep track of which hands are which. The next hand I saw was Sarah, although I heard Henry had a hand up physically. So do we want to recognize Henry?
Yes,
I didn't. Go ahead, Henry.
I just want to thank Grace for being here and for the work that she's doing. And Grace, I met you on 2 or 3 occasions, once at the Friends Place in Dover a couple of years ago for a celebration. And I spent 2 years in the Democratic Republic of Congo teaching French in a secondary school. And I relate to you in that way. That was the experience of my life. And we have, I last met you at the Community Church of Durham very recently when you showed up with some colleagues, and we had a wonderful celebration. And I just want to acknowledge that and say that I'm trying to keep track of what I'm trying to say here. I really very much, and as you know, in our Community Church of Durham, we have a fellow and friend Cameroonian living there, whom you know, Ernest. He is a refugee seeking asylum, and we're supporting him. And I'm happy to be involved in this work. I could do more, but I need more guidance. And I have had a wonderful time celebrating this weekend at the, for example, New Hope Baptist Church yesterday in Portsmouth, celebrating Martin Luther King and being challenged to move forward and to see what we can do going forward. So thank you, Grace, so much.
Thank you so much, Henry. And I absolutely do remember, and I'm so glad that I was able to spend time with you in those spaces. And I will just tie what you're saying back to Evelyn, and then I'll toss it back to folks just to quickly reflect that that is anti-racist right there, is being in community with one another in those ways, is getting personal with one another, and is breaking through and understanding, like getting less numb, I guess. So much of our culture lends itself to numbness, to kind of shutting off, shutting down. And I'm really in awe about how all the work that needs to be done is being done, is really being done by a collective of people, and then everyone doing their part, whatever that part looks like, and taking the time to support and celebrate with one another. So thank you. Thank you, Henry.
All right, next in the stack, Sarah and JJ.
Hi, Grace. Nice to see you. And one of the things that I treasure is just that we probably each of us have some kind of relationship with you. That's really the key to the better world. I was kind of struck by the fact that we were talking about the commonalities and how so much of what you work for is a universal need. And yet I'm thinking you must have a unique perspective. There are things that your community may be looking for that are different. I think about the fact that, for instance, in Concord, the Keach Park wants to have lights out, and yet the Concord is put that priority years off so that they can work on the golf course of all things. What a symbol of patriarchy. So love to hear just your perspective. What are the things that we don't know about that you long for, that are unique beyond the usual universal things?
Well, thank you for that, Sarah. That's actually a really great question. I've thought about this quite a bit, because one thing that is unique to and being an African immigrant in particular, a lot of, I can speak only from my own experience, but a lot of immigrants, I think, retain some connection to their homeland, and especially African immigrants, and a lot of, I think, our Latin and South American brothers and sisters and siblings do this as well. But you come to the United States, you don't lose connection to, family back home, people that you may have known back home. Some do, of course, people have different life situations, but the majority of people retain some ties to family members back home. And one thing that is glaring, right, is that oftentimes community members, family members that I know they may not be able to own their own homes here, may not even really be able to run their own businesses with success. A lot of people in my community are pigeonholed into healthcare and service industries. So economic options are really limited. Home ownership options are really limited because of how expensive it is to do that here. And it's oftentimes a lack of resourcing rather than a lack of intelligence or experience or acumen. And what I find is that, you know, I have family members who may not be able to own property here, but have multiple properties back in their home country. Family and community members who are not able to do, you know, go beyond doing direct care service work, but own and running multi-layered businesses with staff back home, are doing huge projects and running those projects while in the United States. And there is no support for that outside of the communities themselves. There is no, you can't go to the bank and be like, oh, I would like a loan to fund my community water drilling project back in Congo. They'll look at you like, okay, good luck, go find a bank in Congo. So there's oftentimes, the basic needs are the same in terms of like access to economic job security, job training and all that, but there are very specific things that people are working on, initiatives that people are focused on doing and building, and there's no support in the United States. People have to create their own support networks to get the resourcing, the information, the training, that they need to be able to take on those types of projects back home, and where perhaps there would be resources if you know the right person or are within the right network. Those networks are barred to my community. So people are working on intricate stuff with little support here in the United States.
Thank you.
Thanks, Grace. Next on stack is Terry. Terry, go ahead.
Hello, thank you, Grace. Thank you, New Hampshire Peace Action. I'm from Canada, and I find so many similarities in dealings. You know, I started thinking about this process. Why don't they have peace negotiation classes starting in grade 1? Why don't they have where the bullies are eliminated out of schools?
Oh, Terry, you put yourself on mute.
Oh
Oh,
God,
there you go.
go to sleep. Am I on now?
Yes.
Yep, we can hear you now.
Why don't they have more classes, more to teach peace studies, to teach education, to teach rather than defense and everybody's fighting each other to get to the top, which never really happens. Like, people are people wherever they are. And until we start recognizing that the indigenous people who, the lands they lived on before we came, you know, for 150 years, and all of a sudden we took over, pushed them out. It's so wrong. Like, we are such bullies. And teaching in schools, what do you think about that, Grace? Would you help?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. One of the, education is so valuable in my culture, so valuable in my family. My mother was the first woman in her college class when she was in college in Congo in the 70s. And it was a huge turning point. I come from a family that highly valued education. And one of the realities is that the quality of education that we receive in the United States in comparison to other countries, and thinking of my own country in particular, is very subpar. It's unfortunate, that the standard that we use, not to criticize that there are specifics under that standard, but we call our standard of education of what is considered and good enough is adequate, not excellent, not, reaching for the moon, just adequate, base. So I think what's really important is understanding both that public education is a foundation of a democratic society, a well-funded, resourced public education is fundamental to a healthy democracy. But part of the reason why we have the education, public education access that we do is in part because of the Black liberation struggle and because of what Black activists and Black ancestors fought for in order for the Black children to be able to access even just a fundamental education. And that I think in understanding with the way that I see it, in understanding the poison of white supremacy is that white supremacy will poison the drinking water so none of us can drink from it. And education is one of those things. And as we're seeing that people are willing to dismantle our public education, are willing to defund it as much as possible in order, not even though it is something that is so deeply necessary, we need more resources, we need more teachers, we need better classrooms, better materials, we need more space and more imagination in freedom for our educators to be able to teach the things that we need to learn, the things that we want to learn. And the fact of the matter that even now we still, it just kills me that in New Hampshire, our educators are not even allowed to discuss certain divisive concepts. And that is in fact the law of the state. We're seeing a fundamental systemic disinvestment in something that will create exactly that. It create bringing people together. And we do need those things, and those things are available, but we need to actually be able to invest in that infrastructure, and not only invest in that infrastructure, but also to uphold the importance of it as a value of our culture and our society and our country, and not see it as something that can be discarded so easily or simply replaced by something else.
Thanks, Grace. I just wanted to add one thing. We need a Department of Peace, not a Department of Defense.
Amen.
Let's start from there when the government in every country. Thanks.
Thank you, Terry. Flo, you're up.
Everyone. Well, first of all, I just want to say I'm really excited just looking at the room and just seeing everyone showing up. Like Grace, I'm an immigrant myself. A lot of people don't know this because I was actually raised to mask my identity. And what I mean by that is my parents, for my sake, because they didn't want me to be bullied, they didn't want me getting called the N-word, taught me early on to assimilate, mask my accent, and just try my best to essentially not mention that, you know, I'm African. So I remember when I finally got married, I was so excited because then no one would have to see my, you know, African last name. But I think one of the biggest things then, and that I just see is that even if you're educated, which for me, having a Juris Doctorate doesn't always earn you the respect that you deserve, doesn't always get you to be seen other than that you're a woman and you're Black. It's like no matter what, who I am for some people is going to be a constant distraction. So finally, now that I'm older, mature, and more into the DEI space, I'm now learning how to embrace who I am. Because in order for me, as a mother of 3 kids, 3 girls, in order for me to teach my children about, you know, self-love and self-care and embracing who you are, it starts with me. One of the biggest things when it comes to diversity that I see is that there are some people who are uncomfortable with having those tough racial conversations. And that's why, as Grace mentioned, we're starting to see this ideology of, well, we're not going to talk about it in our schools. We're actually going to make it illegal if teachers want to talk about it. It's this concept of out of sight, out of mind, which we're seeing. And there's also this push to make slavery, sound like, a lot of immigration, people just voluntarily came here, or involuntary immigration, however terminology they want to use. It's a thing of erasing history so that we don't have to have these uncomfortable conversations. But the problem is, I'm not really sure how it's helping anything. Someone mentioned, well, right now it's so divisive, right? We're like Democrats, Republicans, Independents. Everybody is just caught in this wild, wild west shenanigans. But at the end of the day, what we're not paying attention to is the implementation of common sense strategies that not only help immigrants, but that help everyone who's right here. The people are suffering while politicians, unfortunately, at the end of the day, they get a paycheck and nothing gets done. Whether strategies and laws and things are implemented, they're still getting paid. And what we need here, looking around this room, and that I'm really happy to see, is allyship. Allyship matters. We need more white people standing up and saying what is going on is not permissible. It will not be accepted. And we will not tolerate any laws that aim at the continuous ideology of trying to have a classification that says you're different, and because you live in this zip code, you can't get these resources or that resource. And so I'm really happy to be here and listen to Grace, and I can relate with her. I've been an immigrant and somebody who grew up here since I was 7. I'm now 43, so I've been here for a long time. And just to Grace's point is that because I've been here for so long, and because I was taught to assimilate the American culture, I can't even identify with the African culture because I was taught so early on to forget it. So that's one of the biggest problems, is how can people be able to keep both cultures and not be considered un-American, right? So that's my 2 piece. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Flo. And I'm so happy to see you here. It makes my heart so happy when I see another sister and other sisters in spaces like this, because it is so important. And you're absolutely right. And I think one of the things that I recognize, one of the areas of work that we do at AFSC is in the area called healing justice. And it's taken me a long time to understand that work is done in the criminal legal system to dismantle mass incarceration and to minimize the impact of state violence and the reach of state violence and the power of the state to enact violence on our communities. But one thing that I have come to understand more deeply is when we're talking about healing, we're talking about rebuilding our sense of ourselves, our sense of our culture, and we're rebuilding what racism, what white supremacy, what patriarchy, and capitalism and oppression, systems of oppression have taken from us, which is an understanding. One of my favorite authors has said that, we are not percentages of anything, we are not levels of things. All the backgrounds and ethnic backgrounds that we embody, all the cultures that our ancestors were a part of, they're all mixed within us, no matter what our ties to how strong or weak those ties may have become over time, but that we are not percentages, we're not numbers. All of that which came before us flows within us. And I love that. And I love that you're speaking to the importance of recognizing the importance of allyship and that each of us can exist. I think one of the lies of white supremacy is in that binary, is in systems of oppression, is in that there can be only this or that we cannot have national security and feed people. We cannot have secure borders and strong education. We cannot have this, we must have that. And when we're presented with that choice, the answer is always, so we have to give up on those basic necessities. We have to give up on those things that will ensure safety and security in our communities. We have to give up on those things and instead fund enforcement, militarization, war machines. There is always money for those things and not enough money for the things that actually grow and nurture us.
I may ask, Flo, what country do you come from?
I came from Zimbabwe.
Wonderful. I was there once. Thank you. Wonderful.
No problem.
All right. Next on stack is David Erickson.
Hello, everybody. I'm a 68-year-old member of the Ware Friends meeting up in Henniker, and I taught tech ed for most of my work. No, that's not true. I was a carpenter and tech ed teacher, but I got the opportunity to teach social studies while I taught in Henniker, and the principal asked me to teach she called it the Civil War. And she wanted me to make sure they learned all the dates of all the battles. So I said, what time period am I covering? And she said, well, 1800 to 1900. And I said, lots of other things happened during that time. Can't I teach something about Indigenous Americans, something about the beginnings of the women's rights movement? And we finally agreed that, yeah, I guess I could do that as long as they learned all the dates of the battles. So I worked on making sure I complied with dates of the battles, but got a lot more in there too. But I wish I was still teaching there so I could have gone on teaching about the horrible history of slavery in this country, including in New Hampshire, as we know. And so I could have gotten fired and been a test case, because somebody's got to stand up. And at age 68, it would be, and with the possibility of continuing as a carpenter, I wouldn't have had to be keeping my head down and behaving myself. So who's that teacher going to be who's going to stand up and teach what we need to be teaching in social studies in New Hampshire schools?
Yeah, thank you, David. And I think what we're seeing is, some teachers are willing to push through, despite some educators are like, what, screw this, we're going to teach what we're going to teach, we're going to take that chance. But they know that the consequences would be steep. They would lose their license, that they would bring upon themselves just a mash of complaints, but many more teachers who would have been willing to teach those things, to push themselves, are too afraid. They have to make the hard choices themselves, that they cannot lose their jobs. They have to provide for their families. They have to do the work to which that they're called to do. And that's exactly what this law and laws like it and policies like this does. And I think it's really important for us to see that this in of itself is a tool of white supremacy. That when power refuses to acknowledge itself, that in and of itself is privilege and power. And when you're able to legislate away discomfort and guilt, and frustration and unwillingness, but we're not able to legislate saving people's lives, then that's a big problem. And so that's a big disparity. And that's an indication of that the very thing that we're continuing to fight for is still present and necessary. And I think it calls on all of us to become those teachers, and to recognize that we must both simultaneously work to change and transform these systems, but we must also embody these systems ourselves in our ways that we present. We're not all of us are educators, certainly. No one is asking anyone to write curriculum, but learning your own self, and teaching and sharing what you've learned with those in your life I think is a very important, so that we all each become both the student and the teacher in this work. I think we have to. So Will, I know we're running a little bit low on time, but I did see some questions in the chat too, so I want to make sure I'm not missing anybody.
Oh no, I'm moving on to Janice right now. So I think we're going to be able to keep up with everything. We'll see. I mean, if the questions keep coming, we'll run over. But Jana is next up. So Jana asks, I was wondering if Grace could recommend any books, etc., that might educate us and others about the underlying white supremacy rules and characteristics of white culture that are energized to squash any progress towards peace and justice. Also, do you have anything to say about our relationships as people to the earth that may enhance or harm attempts towards peace and justice?
Yes, absolutely. So I would say there are so many books. As to what tends to happen when I'm a little bit low on my energy batteries and feeling a little bit anxious about, I'm not able to recall exactly the books that I would recommend, but I will happily leave, send a list to Will and the New Hampshire Peace Action team for folks to, that I think would be my recommended readings. But I would actually invite the community, if there are books that folks have been reading that they would recommend, please share in the chat. I'm sure there would be overlap from my list as well, but I think folks are already reading some pretty awesome things. So I invite people to put things in the chat that they would recommend in terms of reading to better understand white supremacy and really the aspects of it and why we're fighting back against it. And then to your second question, I would say that in terms of, I think what's important in the environmental justice work, I think for a long time, environmental justice work has reflected white supremacists, white supremacy. It's been for predominantly white movement that has almost in many ways divorced the people from the planet itself. I think in early times, people would talk about, overpopulation and the need to call how many people are on the planet. And, that easily gets in eugenics and the decision of who gets to not live here because supposedly we are overburdening the earth. But I think there's data now that shows that we don't take up that much space on the planet as many people as we are. And it's really important to root any environmental justice and climate justice work in Indigenous and African and Black and Brown communities that have been doing this work as well. I always refer back to people who are in those communities who are the lead in this. I feel like for myself, I'm still so much a student. I'm learning much more about what the environmental justice and climate justice work that we do is tied to other social justice issues that we fight for. And so when I think about how I connect to environmental justice work, not only because, yes, of course, this is our planet, we have to save our planet. There's no Earth B. This is it. We get Earth A. But also recognizing that the relationships that Indigenous people have had and continue to have to the planet, and the ways that climate change is affecting the global South much more. Those who are already strained, those who are already being exploited by more powerful and quote unquote first world nations. Those countries include my own, and that I'm come from a country that is dealing with incredible deforestation, drought, changes in the landscape that has completely disabled people's ability to grow their own food and to work the land the way that they used to and the way they've been able to do for generations. And so I think that any work that we do to reconnect to the planet, to reconnect to fighting for the rights of our planet, the rights for us to live on our planet and to take care of our planet and to hold corporations and governments accountable for the impact of our planet, has to be rooted in the climate justice warriors who are Indigenous, Black, and Brown, because they know, they know exactly, because it cannot be depersonalized, it cannot be decoupled from our economic system, from our militarization. All of those things are contributing to the exploitation and the changes that we are seeing and experiencing. And until we change that, we can't have capitalism and climate justice. So until we recognize that, then environmental justice work and our relations to the planet is disconnected. And it just becomes, kind of greenified white supremacy.
Thank you so much, Grace. There are a lot of great book recommendations and references for some of this in the chat in response to the first part of Jana's question. The next question in the chat is from Siddhartha. And Siddhartha asks, Gandhi was inspired by Tolstoy and Thoreau, and Gandhi inspired Dr. King, who visited India in 1959. How can we learn from one another's experience fighting white supremacy in a deliberate and systematic way and speak the truth gently to our white friends?
Thank you, Siddhartha, for that question. I would say first is recognizing that white supremacy evolves. White supremacy has evolved, racism has evolved. It is no longer lynching in the streets, although we still are dealing with the extrajudicial killings of Black and Brown people, low-income people. But what it is now it is what we've talked about. It is disinvestment in our public school systems. It is a lack of affordable housing. It is the gagging, the censoring of issues and being able to discuss historical issues and topics that have led to the systems of oppression that we have. It is all of the things, the lack of access to adequate healthcare. It is the continued militarization of our border and the continued demonization of our immigrant brothers and sisters and siblings. That is white supremacy. White supremacy is violent, has been violent, has always been violent. And I think it's important for us to see it clearly for that violence, and that violence has evolved, like Dr. Kendi has said, like a cancer. And it is now a different form of cancer that we have to extricate because it has embedded itself in every aspect of our society and our culture. And in order for us to eradicate it, it will require us to be very clear on what it is and what it is that we're fighting, and to recognize it whenever it takes its most subtle forms, which it does quite often. And oftentimes will be the very language that we use to describe it will be co-opted to gaslight us into believing that it doesn't exist, or that it's really an issue of personal failure rather than systemic injustice. And so in terms of speaking to white people gently, I will be completely honest with you. I think most people who have talked to me will probably say I'm a very gentle speaker. Like if you talk to me in person, I'm very kind, I'm very sweet, but I do not flinch. I do not think that it serves us to flinch in our directness. I'm very blessed to have a husband who has autism, and he has taught me the gift of directness. And he has taught me the gift of owning your own discomfort and owning your own shit, even if it hurts to hear. And I think it is really important for us to approach our white family members, community, siblings, brothers and sisters with that unflinching directness and honesty. I think we have a lot to learn for those of us, especially who are neurotypical, from our neurodivergent loved ones, that there is an importance in speaking the simple truth, in speaking what is as it is. And it is not cruel to speak what is as it is. It is crueler to pretend and to go around in circles and to soften and to speak in such a way that I think that will obfuscate what is really there. And I think one thing that I recognize, and I've reflected a lot on as I was listening to Dr. King's speeches, is the reality of death and violence and pain that people were living with, and in a visceral way that I think we don't see as much today, despite how connected we are and how much more access we have. White supremacy is violence, and we don't have to act violently to one another. But I think that it is not. I can be kind, and I think kindness isn't always gentle per se, but it is truthful. And so we can be kind in our, sometimes we can be kind. Sometimes we have to just tell people we have to tell people the truth, regardless of how unkind it may be. But we can speak lovingly and kindly, but I think it is important to speak directly and to not soften what is not soft to begin with. And white supremacy is not soft. It has never been soft.
Oh, what a really great note to end us with. Gives us a lot to think about, and some really good advice for how to move forward. I did want to call attention in the chat to Nancy's question asking about specific actions being taken to support HB 61, et cetera, and Doreen's response referring you to State House Watch. AFSC is always organizing testimony on bills and people to call their representatives on bills to try to change the direction that we are moving for the better. But there's also, I just want to make sure that we'll save this chat. We'll get it mailed out to people by email. So if you're here, you can get all of these great book recommendations and websites that are in the chat that people that this community has put forward. Grace, I want to just thank you from the bottom of my heart for giving us your time tonight, and for leading this discussion with such grace. You really are a gift to our movement, and I appreciate you coming on tonight.
Thank you so much.
Merci, merci, Madame Grace. Merci beaucoup. C'est très, très bien.
Merci
Ça fait
beaucoup.
plaisir.
Merci à tous. Thank you so much. And I will say too, but just very quickly, I know we run out of time, but in addition to, keeping up to date with what's happening at the State House in New Hampshire with State House Watch, and I will just flag that we did put out our newsletter for the coming week, and we have a number of bills that we would love your support on. So please do go to the website. The action alerts are right at the top, so you can get, you can know where to sign in, which bills that we're tracking this week that are critical for that infrastructure that we need to really take care of each other. And I will also like to call attention to in Manchester, there is a homeless encampment right outside of one of the shelters that is scheduled for a sweep. It has been paused by a judge, but we're expecting a ruling, an order coming from that judge as to whether or not the city can go ahead and proceed with another encampment sweep and unfortunately, the city does not have a permanent or a good plan for where people can go. The emergency shelter that has been put into place is less than adequate. And so I invite you all, if you are able to donate either your time by bearing witness to what is happening at the encampment, being a body there to support folks on the ground, or if you were able to donate warm weather items, things to keep people warm, whether they are forcibly or choose to disperse from that area or choose to stay. It's cold. It's real cold out there. And so blankets, hand warmers, hats, gloves, I'm collecting all of that. And so I will leave my email in the chat as well and invite folks to connect with me. And I'd be happy to coordinate or get those donations over to folks on the ground or who are working directly with and alongside our homeless and houseless community members.
Thank you so much, Grace, for bringing that up. It's a critical local need that folks, if you can get involved and help out in any way, please do. You can stay in touch with NHPA through nhpeaceaction.org. Check us out on Facebook. We have these conversations every 2 weeks. This series will remain open and free for everyone. However, if you are able to contribute now or in the future, your financial support makes it possible for us to keep doing this work. Also check out AFSC's website. I know we wouldn't be here without AFSC, and we wouldn't. We lean on AFSC heavily to be able to do our work effectively. The sharing of office space is more than just sharing of office space. We get to share in their wisdom and their leadership, and we couldn't do the work without them. So please check that out too. 2 weeks from now, we're going to host David Hartsaw, who's going to talk about waging peace. He's going to talk about his global adventures as a lifelong activist. 2 weeks later, so that'll be January 30th for David. February 13th, we'll host Whitney Howarth, one of our board members, who's going to talk about restorative practices in our schools as a means of conflict resolution. Also, we have a winter book study. We are reading the book Dignity, which explores the role that dignity plays in global peace movements and in conflict resolution globally, and the importance of dignity. You can join that on January 26th and then every other Thursday. So that's all I've got for tonight. Thank you all for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and end our live stream. And folks who are going to stick around for a few minutes, I think Grace has got to go in a few